welcome to the Redevelopment Agency abbreviated meeting to discuss the budget today. I want to take a minute and explain that some of us had the opportunity to attend the annual awards luncheon for our police department over at Little America, and it's always very moving to see those honored who give so much service to our city. And they give civilian awards as well as those for officers, and I was pleased to participate in that along with Board Member Mendenhall and Board Member Johnston, and so we're running a little bit behind because it was important to be there. Also, I want to excuse Board Member Kitchen. He is traveling and is unable to be with us today, but has sent a few thoughts for us to discuss. So with that, we will begin, first of all, with our general comments to the board. I have one card. If anyone would like to comment additionally, please fill out a card, and that could come up. And this is from Bernard Hart. Bernie, you want to come up and be here at the mic and speak nice and loud to us? Thank you so much. And a reminder, just like in council meeting, it's a 2-minute limit. And we don't start till you start speaking. Any of them, just make sure the light's on and be sure you speak into it. Bernie, thanks.
Thank you. Thanks for your work. I understand it's not an easy job, but I was aware that you're through this hearing are fund the health department and some of the things that they do with the campers in the city, and it's something that concerns me. I think in some ways when I hear success measured in tonnage and storage and the amount of stuff we've managed to, in my dialogue and in my world, take away from the homeless, move on to some other place and disrupt their way of living and their way of what they do things, and knowing that it makes a number of people uncomfortable. And the results of this process is our inability to understand or figure out a way to deal with this population. And this is the results of that inability to deal with the population and effectively and in a positive way, because I think in the long run, everybody wants something positive to happen to these individuals. And we sit back and we expect them to make, the social workers and people in the community, the police, that these campers should be responding reasonably to their suggestions, when I'm willing to guess that 75% of them are dealing with some form of mental illness, and it's beyond them to act rationally to any of our prompting. So all I'm asking you is to, in your deliberation with the health department and the police department and the administration, is to some way open a door and keep a door open for new dialogue and a new way to talk about the problem, because I'm finding that the system up until this point has been very closed. They've developed their own solutions to these problems, and none of them have ever worked, and none of them are changing the problem. So I would ask you somehow to open a door to discussions and dialogue about new ways to handle the problem. So thank you very much. Have a great day.
Thank you so much, Mr. Hart. We appreciate all the work you do also with Tai Chi. It's a great thing. Thanks. Is there anyone else who would like to comment to the RDA board today? All right, then we will look to approve our minutes. We had some changes made to them, as you will recall. After our last meeting, it was brought to our attention they needed some tweaking. I'm looking for someone to make a motion to approve the minutes.
Move approval.
There's a motion to approve the minutes of March 28, 2017 by Board Member Mendenhall.
Second.
Second by Board Member Johnston. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion passes and the minutes are approved. Now we will jump into the exciting and scintillating discussion about the RDA budget. And I would start by saying that I'm looking for your direction, board members. I would like to propose that anything that is CIP related, that could be CIP projects, be set aside to talk about in our general CIP discussion following the budget. can I look to you to see if, is that something we should straw poll, Jennifer? Is that, or just a
Sure.
general?
Whatever you would prefer. I think we can either go by it item by item or just sort of a general thing.
And I'm going to propose that unless there's something specifically in CIP that you want us to discuss now, that we wait on the rest of the CIP budget to talk about it in context with the rest of the CIP budget. Those in favor of doing that, please give me a thumbs up. Okay. Stan, you want to weigh in? Okay. Waiting on CIP? Okay. That looks like that's the direction we'll go. So, board members, if you do have something that you specifically want to draw our attention to, please do that. Then, and I'm going to turn it over to Jennifer Bruno and Benjamin Lutke to walk us through things. You also, in your packet, the blue envelope, have a spreadsheet that was put together for us at my request, and I really appreciate what a great job this is. Green indicates requests that may well be ready for adoption. Yellow, we need some direction or discussion. And blue is CIP related. So where would you like to start?
Madam Chair, if I may, I apologize for my tardiness, but I just wanted to extend my gratitude to you for taking my cold away, because I feel much better, but it doesn't sound like you do.
You are so nice to share all those germs that we all got on the airplane. No, thank you. I'm actually better than I was, but thanks. And we're glad to have you back with us. So, and I'm happy I rallied. So, all right, Jennifer, where would you like to start?
So we can just start, I think, from the spreadsheet and maybe go down item by item, if that's okay. And
Great.
then what we'll do is we'll plan on skipping through the items that are highlighted in green unless any board members have any questions about those items, just for the sake of speed.
Okay.
So the first item that falls into the sort of need more board discussion category is the Utah Theater due diligence reimbursement. And the explanation from the administration on this is that this would be a reimbursement for due diligence activities that are right now being undertaken on behalf of a consultant. And so this would be reimbursement of that consultant that wasn't included in the initial contract. And I think because some board members have expressed interest in how the Utah Theater might be developed in the future, I didn't know if the board wanted to have a more in-depth discussion on this item, or maybe put contingencies on the funding about receiving more regular reports from the consultant about what's going on.
Thank you. Discussion on this item?
Any other further background on this consultant for $100,000? Or what are they doing? What was their scope of work? I mean, haven't we already gone down this route with?
Right. I think this is the continuation, and maybe RDA staff can fill in here or jump in if I'm incorrect.
This doesn't have
but
anything
this is
to do with the prior agreement that we had, development agreement to pursue things with LaSalle Group.
It is, and the agreement was modified to include the Hines Group. They own the building directly to the north of the Utah Theater, and so this is a continuation of this.
Is that the Kearns building?
Correct. And the part of it is to continue due diligence with them in discussions with the Utah Theater reuse plan. And as was mentioned, we could return back based on the final conclusions of that study and provide a report to the board. Part of it's looking at a whole host of reuse items, and I'll have Ben go in a little bit more detail if you have more detailed questions.
Yeah, I
on
can
that.
add some clarification to that. So
I need both of you also to say your names for
Yes,
us. just-
Edward
I
Butterfield
know
with the
them, but-
Redevelopment Agency.
Thank you.
Ben Davis with
Thanks.
the Redevelopment Agency. So where this term came in was we're in an ENA phase right now, and the only
To correct that, exclusive negotiation agreement is the acronym for ENA.
Yep. And so the only way that we would be bound to that $100,000 it's an up to number, and it's only if we do not reach an option to purchase agreement with them. So and we're fully confident that we're going to get to the option to purchase agreement, and so it's in there as a term to help compensate the developer if we do not reach an option to purchase agreement. Is that that
Do we
helpful?
know what the scope is of that?
Yeah,
That
the
sounds
scope
pretty
is
general.
architectural design, it's structural engineering design, those things that are typical when you're designing a building and doing
And
a site plan.
I think this also might fall into the category of contracts that were written prior to
Absolutely.
the more clear separation of powers situation. So I think in the future, a $100,000 reimbursement, if an option isn't reached, probably wouldn't be included unless those funds were identified prior to the contract being executed.
Absolutely.
Madam
Yep.
Chair?
Yes. Stan.
Ben, do you know if part of the agreement retains ownership of the studies or any consultant work that's done? So the RDA would retain all of that?
Yes.
Should you not reach a conclusion
Yeah,
with
that's
the-
correct.
Okay.
Yep.
Madam Chair?
Charlie?
Yeah, I mean, I have some concerns about this just because I think that we have talked about this before. I think we've gone down this path, we've studied this issue. And what I would be more supportive of is taking a break this year, not moving forward with this additional study, and having, as a board, some more in-depth discussion about what we see as being the most valuable for that Utah Theater building and the land that it sits on.
Yeah, just to clarify, this isn't an additional study, though. It's not. We're not deploying money this year for them to do their work. It's only for them if, in case the project does not get to an option to purchase agreement, which is they'll be done with their due diligence probably in about 6 months, and they'll return back to the board and present those findings.
Back to the point of sort of the more typical way it's handled in the more traditional separation of powers, I think in a perfect world, this money would have been approved by the board prior to the administration entering an exclusive negotiation agreement with them. Because what this money is saying is basically, if the city does not sell the property to this developer, then we'll pay them $100,000.
Yeah, and that's what I'm a little bit concerned with right now, because if we end up, looking and deciding, hey, there are other ideas for this property that may be better for the RDA, better for the city long term, than entering into, than this exclusive negotiation, then, I would be very uncomfortable with that $100,000 option without having a much more in-depth discussion about what we want to do with that site. Now that the Eccles Theater is built, now that the Capitol Theater has been renovated and is being used. So that's the concern that I have right now with the $100,000.
And Madam Chair, can I clarify? What this would do is it would essentially provide us the ability to use those studies as part of the additional discussion. So I think we might go into issues where the RDA didn't pay for those studies initially, but this would provide us some additional information to move forward and apprise everyone of what those next steps could be for the Utah Theater if it's determined not to go from exclusive negotiation to option agreement.
It sounds to me like we may want to hold off on this and perhaps have further discussion on it and maybe even have it be in a budget amendment. Is that, am I reading that right? Or maybe not spending it at all? Give me some direction, board members.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't really heard anything that would lead me to believe that makes sense to do right now, so.
Board Member Johnston, did you
Help me understand if we don't approve this. What happens? There's already an agreement in place, is that correct?
Absolutely. Yep.
And this is a part of the terms of that agreement?
Yes.
So this is similar to the situation of the infrastructure and station center, truthfully, where there were agreements made that included items that needed funding, and that funding was not approved prior to those agreements being made.
This amount was in those agreements? 100,000 was identified as the threshold?
Right. Yeah. And a little more background too. At the time that the contract was negotiated, there was $600 and something thousand in that account, in the Utah Theater account. Again, going
Not for
back,
this purpose, but
not for that purpose,
Right.
but it was dedicated towards the Utah Theater. And again, we were in a different situation than we are now and moving forward. So
Right.
your point is, we
that middle
understand.
time.
Yeah, we get it moving forward, that anything like this would be would be discussed.
Madam Chair?
Yeah. Oh, sorry, Madam Chair.
I wonder if we might have an opportunity to learn more about the contract that as it stands and what they are pursuing in their due diligence that might aid us in whatever path this property goes down. You know, if we don't execute the contract, then what kind of information would they be providing us that might be of value to us? I don't want to say that I don't want to fund this today, but I don't think we understand really what this
I'll give you a
contract is
preview
about.
if you'd like. So what they're doing is typical fit study types, you know, how much density you can do, how high you can go, all that.
Yeah.
And preservation of the theater space or
Yeah.
not at all?
And we're looking at all of that.
Both?
Yeah.
And to go back to
Yeah.
the original question, there's not a call for this money at this time or anything specific for a demand that we're in a short contractual agreement. We're still in compliance with the contract and everything on it. So if we decided, if the board determined to hold off on this by any means, it's not stopping any of the continued progress with the Heinz Corporation on this.
I would think we would appreciate having in writing what those
Yeah.
items Ben just mentioned would be, so that we can look at that and understand that.
So, Madam Chair, if I may, one of the things too that I think might be worthy of board discussion, I mean, it sounds like this is kind of an open-ended agreement now that they might come back to us with a recommendation that's none of us have considered. Not to say that's good or bad, but we really haven't had a policy conversation about what, if anything, we'd like to see happen there. And so if we're then contractually obligated to continue down a path that we may or may not agree on, or at least certainly we probably should have a discussion on about if that use or additional investment or whatever that looks like, it feels like we're getting a little ahead of or potentially could be getting ahead of ourselves, where we end up in a situation where we may or may not like the direction and have an obligation to pay for product that we may or may not use.
Okay, I think that gives you just clarity completely,
Yes,
right?
thank you. That's
And we
very
can,
helpful.
we can provide that follow-up information to the board and see if you
Okay.
want to have a discussion.
Thank you. Okay, then, go ahead.
Next item is actually transfer to the capital expenditures. So the way I think to think about these line items, they appear in a couple of the project areas, is sort of akin to how the general fund handles the transfer from the non-departmental account to CIP. So this is money that's coming from the different project areas being transferred to what is essentially now a RDA CIP account. And there are separate ones for each project area. I think the log was attached to your staff report. So in the Central Business District, the projects that are proposed to receive funding from that $3.5 million are Downtown Placemaking Incentive Program, which is just under $600,000, and the CBD Housing Fund. So in the way we would handle this in the general fund is you would approve the concept of transferring $3.58 million to the, in this case, the CBD CIP fund, but then you wouldn't actually go in and allocate out how those funds are spent until later in the year when you have the full context of all of the CIP projects, and hopefully in the case of the RDA, also the context of different bonding scenarios and different financing scenarios, and so then you would consider all of that together.
And would that also reflect opportunities to use impact fees?
Right, so if it's held at the same time that the general fund CIP discussion's held, that's typically when we would do that kind of review, and
Right.
so that would be the idea.
Okay. Board
Hopefully it
members,
would
are we
work out.
comfortable with that? Okay.
So we'll highlight the proposed projects, just in case any of them, if the board wants to talk about any of them, or if you have any questions about any of them. I think
Okay.
now is a good time to identify those questions so we can start to work on them.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
I guess just to help me understand this, so we're looking at fiscal year 2017 allocation, $500K for the Gallivan roof repair. So that money is going towards that allocation, but the proposed allocation hasn't been done yet. This is just what is being proposed.
Right, so this is a little bit different of a way to look at it, and the only reason we did it this way was because we wanted to have a sense of what CIP accounts are active, in a sense, because if there are some that relate to any projects that are going forward, we wanted to make sure that it was clear what funds were being added to and what funds are just being, are separate projects. So really, the Gallivan roof repair is a one-time project that was funded by you guys mid-year, and so in fiscal year 17. And so that's just a separate standalone CIP account, but because CIP funds don't drop to fund balance at the end of the year, CIP funds stay there until the project is done. We'll begin this process of showing you guys everything, all of the CIP projects that have been approved for a given project area, so that in theory, you can kind of start thinking about all those projects as part of the same group, so that you know what's going on in each project area in each year, even if it's a couple years old.
And nothing is being asked for in the,
Well, I guess that's
Right,
my
that's
follow-up.
right. So with the Gallivan, nothing's being asked for in fiscal year 18.
So my follow-up question is in regards to the Central Business District housing, the $3 million. Do we have any idea, is that just one project in general? Is it to housing across the board in CBD, or?
That is part of what the council has been talking about. There's a few, two or three maybe, areas where we are hoping that the appropriation will be informed by the housing plan and the joint work that is being done together with RDA, the administration, and then they have brought us as staff into that conversation. So we should be able to get back to you fairly soon. We were also going to come back to you with the general policy statements out of the plan. We presented those once, and then some rules of thumb that we have heard the council say in briefings throughout the last couple of years. So we would come back to you with those after the budget, just to get an initial indication, and then from there you could make your funding plans.
Erin?
So this 3 million, should we assume that this is for market rate housing because it isn't included in the affordable housing lump?
I don't think so necessarily, and I think that this is proposed, Ben can help me remember here, they all sort of blend together, to be part of the Neighborhoods of Opportunity funding. So it was previously called the East Side Affordable Housing Initiative. I think now focusing more on the areas of opportunity and kind of using that as the definition rather than what is East Side, what is West Side kind of thing. But again, that's part of the work that Cindy was mentioning, that the details would be fleshed out by the housing plan and then even by the Blue Ribbon Housing Commission. And we'd come back to you for a proposal of what could be done with this money.
That seems like a policy discussion that we've alluded to, but we hadn't decided. And I don't mean to put words in your mouth, but that's a departure from where I thought we were. I thought that we had said we should look at data to help us determine that east side component, and that it probably isn't a straight line. It probably isn't 7th East or something quite simple.
And that's the data for areas of opportunity, neighborhoods
But when
of
we look
opportunity.
at the central business district and the boundaries of that,
Right.
That is putting a point on it. So
Right. And that's probably misleading based on where the funds are coming from. But I think, and maybe it'll be clearer when we get to
Citywide
this-
housing?
Citywide housing is where it will live, essentially. And so then that way it's freed up to be spent anywhere.
And I had a question back on if I could go back to the Gallivan roof. Has that project been completed, begun, anything?
Mm-hmm.
And do I remember that the $500,000 is the total need for the roof repair?
That's right, yeah, and that project's underway. And that's why we're sort of requesting and hoping that those funds can carry over.
Where are we in it? It's underway, but like, are
Yeah,
they
they're sort of
just barely, or-
studying the problem and figuring out what's causing the leaks.
And so the way that CIP funds work in the budgeting process now is that those funds will stay there until they're reappropriated for another purpose. They don't drop at the end of the year. They don't.
Yeah, I'm just concerned with the delay. When we do things in a budget amendment, as you know, we expect that we're doing it in a budget amendment, not in the context of the entire budget, because there's an urgency to it. And it's been some time now, so I'm also going to anticipate that whatever money we've set aside, the $500,000, may not be enough. So what is taking so long?
Well, they have a complicated roof structure, and it's easy to see sort of where the water drips in on the inside, and it's a
Yeah,
little
I've seen
tougher
it.
on a flat roof to figure out how it's getting in there. And so I do know they've made progress, and they've sort of been doing some of the investigative work and looking at it carefully. And so, yeah, it's, I wish I had a better report, but they're underway and making progress.
So do we have a timeline, or until they figure out, obviously, they don't know where the dripping
and
is coming?
David on our staff is project managing that. My apologies, he's not here at the moment.
Okay.
But he, the plan is to get those improvements done before kind of the winter weather hits. And so, I think we're looking at this fall.
I hope so.
Yeah, me too.
Anything else on those CIP-related things? Okay.
Not for
Thank you.
CBD.
Okay. So then next is the West Capitol Hill. And the revenue is pretty straightforward, and also the transfer to administration expenses and taxing entity payments are contractual. So the only item really that fits into a category other than ready for adoption is the 300 West streetscape improvements. And while this is absolutely called for in the plan for West Capitol Hill, it does appear to have a relation to a potential financing conversation later that the board could have. So if you wanted to include it in the CIP discussion later, that would seem to be appropriate.
By other financing, are you meaning like bonding might be
Right.
an option for
Right,
that?
because it's an infrastructure item.
Okay, great. Questions on this one? Anyone? Okay, thank you.
So just skipping down to the next blue or yellow item, this one kind of fits into both categories. This is 9th South Street improvements in West Temple Gateway. And this is an additional funding request from what was funded by the board in the last budget amendment, $518,000. It might make sense to include as part of the context of the CIP budget later this year, because there's also a general fund request for these same 9th South Street improvements, both from the general fund CIP and from impact fees. And so it's not entirely clear to us if that is an additional request or an instead of request. When we asked about it, it seemed that the scope itself was not necessarily completely nailed down, and the design wasn't necessarily completely nailed down. And so I think they're looking at this from a flexibility standpoint. This provides a little bit more flexibility in the scope. And I think the previous discussion the board had, you were looking more of a sort of finite budget number. And so whatever you guys wanted to decide.
Ben, can you remind me, you and I talked about this and I can't remember the number, what percent are we in increase from the original ask last fall?
For just the 900 South Streetscape, I believe it's 75% or 76% increase
Right?
from the original $2.5 million total project cost in October to, including this request before you, it would be about $4.4 million just for the 900 South Streetscape. And so from the $2.5 million to the 4.4, it's about 76% increase.
Okay. I have some questions, but board members, do you have questions before I have a few? Aaron? Okay, Stan? And I'm thinking maybe Ed, do you want to join us? Because we may, or whomever is working, is it Court? Are you? Okay.
So this is one of the projects that's weighing on me. And I think partly because, well, for a couple of factors, but one is my understanding we still don't have a final cost because I don't know if we have a final design, so, but it doesn't feel like we have a final cost estimate. And I think one of the conditions from our previous motion was that one of my hesitations, I think I attached a condition that we'd have to see additional costs and final estimates. I think there were a couple of things. One was public services resolution. One was fire department resolution. Have either of those things happened? You've got sign off. Well, I shouldn't say that because we had sign off last time on public services and they signed off that they wouldn't do it. So where are we with those discussions with public services and the fire department?
Okay, so I'll start with public services. So the board, as one of the contingencies of the budget, was to look at the maintenance and where the funding for that would come from. So I guess the first part of that is they're working on providing an updated budget for us. So that's still working on that. As far as where that comes from, that's, I think, your all's decision to determine where that would come from.
You haven't identified a source, and you're going to leave it to us.
Well, we've looked at lots of different sources. There's the general fund. There's property owners association. There's special assessment areas. There's parking. There's all these different. So we've looked at those. From our recommendation would be that the best source would probably be the general fund.
So, but I mean, that's really basically the pushback from public services is they can't afford to do it in their general fund allocation. So
Right.
Are you suggesting a specific general fund allocation for the maintenance of this 4 blocks?
Yes.
So that's troublesome to me, council members or board members. The other, fire department.
Mm-hmm.
Are they good?
As far as
They were, last time we talked about this, they still had not signed off on their reservations concerning the width of the street.
We continue to work with them. We looked at the width of the street. They've signed off on the width of the street and how the bike lanes work and everything.
So they're good
Mm-hmm.
Going forward.
Yep.
So just out of curiosity for myself, I actually had staff pull up some dollars from the project that we did on 9th and 9th East, because it seems like a similar neighborhood to me. It's actually a larger community neighborhood business area. The city had looked at providing an opportunity for the property owners to be engaged, and my understanding is, even in current dollars, I think the original project was about 2.4 million. The neighbors decided they didn't want to participate at that level in the assessment, so it was actually scaled back because the city didn't want to pay the rest of that. And I think we ended up with most of those improvements up there at around $2 million. We're talking about 4.5 and growing. I mean, this doesn't feel like it has any containment around it. And I'm really getting very concerned about the amount of money we're putting into this is not even 4 blocks fully. This is a significant investment in an area, in a project that we're going to have to identify ongoing funding for to maintain, and I'm getting very concerned about cost. It almost feels like perhaps the conversation should be how much are we willing to spend there and design a project that fits within the scope of how much money we want to spend there. But this feels like a lot of investment for a relatively small business node. Sure, it has potential in the future. We haven't talked to any of the property owners about their interest or willingness to participate. The 9th people participate, or did. Yeah, I've got increasing concerns about it.
May I?
Aaron?
I share your concern, Stan, about the 76% increase in under a year on this cost, and that we don't have a final cost yet. And even though I made the motion for us to approve this money, it is troublesome to me. And I will admit that half of this is in District 5. The other half is in District 4, with 9th South as our boundary. And I have just a few mentions. One is that 9th and 9th has struggled to get attention, as we know, because we recently appropriated some money to do some upkeep on what's now a decade-old investment there. The lack of garbage cans, which now they have from our recent investment, the gardening, the lack of gardening, the chipping paint off of poles and things, that this continued investment, this maintenance is something that I think the 9th conversation was part of why we started to say, tell us what the ongoing is, because we're making capital commitments without looking at ongoing requirements, mostly from public services. And so I think it is sticker shock, and we want it to be. We want to know what that number is, but I also don't want the reality of ongoing maintenance to keep us from doing capital improvements in the first place. I don't disagree that we should have we maybe should have a discussion around limits, and what are our limits for this particular investment. 9th and 9th East wasn't an RDA project area. This is an RDA project area. And we are talking about undergrounding, which is a major piece of this investment. We didn't do undergrounding at 9th and 9th, as far as I know, those years and years ago. So it is street improvements. It's also undergrounding, and that's from what I know, that's the majority of what we don't have a handle on yet.
It's actually separate from the $4.5 million.
So the total we're looking at 6.1 plus an additional 518. And so that's what I'm assuming the undergrounding is the other portion of that. I mean, and we still don't know a number on that. So,
yeah, I think the RDA staff is working.
We're working on that.
yeah, see, I'm just growing increasingly concerned about the amount of money. And frankly, you know, I look at some other projects that could still happen in that area. I mean, one of the things I would love to see happen is a conversation about changing that freeway approach there. We've talked about that off and on.
Funded a study for that
exactly.
analysis to happen, and it hasn't begun.
And it hasn't begun yet. And I imagine that some money there would be something we could consider, you know, kicking in to at least get something going there. I don't know. It's hard for me to imagine that we're going to be persuasive enough to convince the state to do it all on their own, but
They love us. They'll do that for sure.
to
Do you mean to
decommission that
decommission that
component of
offering?
it. But certainly there will be some property recovery. There'll be some expense to the city if we pursue that area. It's just one example of things. I mean, I'm just concerned about what feels like a really significant street investment, which I'm sure will be spectacular. It better be for $4.5 million.
It's apples and oranges in some ways, though. I mean, look at 9th and 9th East and the kind of community generation that was even there before those investments were made. And look at 2nd West and 9th South, that we do have a freeway off-ramp right there in the neighborhood. We do have a significant amount of affordable housing right there. And the kind of community investment that we saw in 9th East just isn't there at 2nd West. So I don't want us to get too close to saying, well, we spent 2.2 there, so I think we should only spend 2.2 here, because it's not the same neighborhood. And that's why it's an RDA project area. I'm not saying that I'm feeling 100% about this 4.4, but I do think it's dangerous for us to compare the two too much.
No.
I'm going to cut you off, James.
No, this is crazy. I mean, this is the whole conversation that we had last time. We had $2.5 million. They didn't know how much more was going to be there. Maybe 500, maybe 700. Here we are, 76% higher. This is absolutely ridiculous. Maybe somebody can remind me. I thought that there was another way to do this plan without having to do undergrounding, where they actually do decorative poles and they raise the power lines and scoot the poles closer to the street. I don't know if that was something that Rocky Mountain Power had come out and said, but I would look at exploring every other option that we have to make it so we have the step backs and setbacks so that these developments can move forward, because I won't fund an additional 76% towards this project.
Can I speak to the change, to that increase? And again, I'm going to lean on how things used to be, how we would, as a group, we would all move forward at conceptual design numbers. We'd present those. We'd have a discussion. Same with schematic design. We'd do that. Design development, we would do that. And that's the way that this process has gone. And I think that's where, and I'm definitely sensitive to the perception that we're increasing as we go. When you all receive a number from engineering, when they present a budget to it, they've had a whole year to study things out. So 1 year they get budget for design, they present you one number, and I see your point, James, and that it's like we're adding these things, but this is how we used to do things as the RDA. Obviously, moving forward, it will be completely different, because the way I guess I understand it, correct me if I'm wrong, is that we will request budget funding. We'll spend a good year, we'll get you those numbers, so that we can we will only present you one number, and so that there's not this whole feeling that, hey, we're adding 76%, we're adding 83%. And so that's, hopefully that helps. That's how we see it. That's how I see it.
Ben, can I ask you or Ed, what would it take to get that number, to know the whole number? And you may make a good point saying engineering has a year to give us that. You haven't had that long. But I think for us to have some comfort, we need that. The other thing I'm looking for is for us to say, okay, this is the amount we're willing to give you.
Yep.
Make it fit. If you have to reduce some things, do it. And I feel like in March, when this was adopted, even though it was barely adopted, and I didn't support it, but it was adopted and people have relied on that.
Yep.
And I don't think it's fair to, when there's been reliance on that decision that we made. But I think we need to figure out a way to say, this is as much as we're giving you. You make, as Stan said, you make the scope fit the money we're giving you.
Yep.
So can you give us some direction how to go there?
So at the March board meeting, there were the 6 contingencies. I don't know if we want to go through all of them specifically.
Do you want to just run through those for a minute?
Yeah, Madam Chair, may I add, we've had contact with the council staff and provided them updates on the progress on these 6 items.
Right.
So
We
that
included
everyone's
those.
apprised of,
Right.
of these, and just want to let you know.
Do you want to go over those again? Those 6 items or not?
Those are-
Cindy?
Clarify
Yes,
one
Cindy.
Those are
Thing.
included on page 10
Right,
of the
they're-
staff
I was gonna
report.
say, they're in
I
the
don't know if you
staff
got there,
report.
but
Yeah.
One piece of clarification.
Yeah.
There was an option before the board at one of the previous meetings that included what Councilmember Rogers was saying, and he was just asking me about it, so I'll clarify for the whole board. That option of looking at alternatives, scooting the power poles out, not doing the underground and scooting the power poles out, changing things a little bit that way so that it's less expensive, was not something we felt like we had the authority to pursue, because that night the council voted to proceed with the project as planned.
with the undergrounding.
With the undergrounding, yeah. So that's why that information is not available to you.
Well, Madam Chair, for me, that is imperative for us to move forward, because for us to just do a blank check saying this is what we're going to do instead of having alternative, I'd like a straw poll for us to go and look at what it actually cost us to move power lines and go higher with the power poles.
Can
And
I
do you
add,
wanna-
can I add to that conversation, James? Is that going back to the community vision, so December of 2015, the community, rather than have a dedicated public park or something like that, they wanted to take their street back, and they wanted a park-like feel on the street. And one of the main components of that was large street trees. And in order to get those large street trees in, and I think our numbers are over 100 street trees, going from 12 existing to over 100, in order to get that park-like feel, that's the power poles needed to come down. That was the basis for that. One of the main driving factors behind
I get
that.
it, but
So
I've gone through this whole planning phase with parks, and parks come out completely different than what we're talking about too. So I want a toilet of solid gold, but that's not going to happen when I have a porcelain that does the same thing.
So let me go. I didn't mean to
and
cut
then
you
in
off. Go ahead,
addition to
Ben.
that, I'll just add, so where we're coming from is the park-like, the feel, the trees, as well as really maximizing what zoning allows us to do. By undergrounding the power, we're able to do that. We're able to maximize the FB UN2 zoning. We're able to get the height and the density that the zoning allows in that area. So on those 2 points.
So Ben, don't you really need to know what the costs are for the undergrounding? Because that would have to happen simultaneously, wouldn't
Right.
it? I mean, it's not something you could do one and then the other. You could probably bury power first before you did street improvements, but you certainly shouldn't do street improvements and then bury power.
Right.
It would seem so.
We went back to Rocky Mountain Power, and they were very confident with the number that they gave us, and
that's 2.375
2.375.
million. The other thing that I don't remember, I sort of remember bringing it up. I'm not sure that we sent any direction for it, but you reminded me when you said a park-like feel. One of the opportunities I think we should make sure we've explored is the idea of 9th South as a linear park as part of the east-west Parkway connection, and is it eligible for impact fees if there's a way to define it by that? And have you researched that?
Have. And so the 9-line trail portion, that is the $305,000 or $306,000 that we were speaking about to fund a portion of just the 9-line trail. As far as parks impact fees, coordinating with them, their feel is that this linear park feel does not add to their overall level of service of parks in the city. Therefore, from their perspective, and it may require some additional conversation, that it would not be parks impact fee eligible, is what I was told.
But the trails impact fee is part of the general fund request, and so that's another reason why, as staff, we thought having it in the context of that discussion would make sense.
Yeah, that does make some sense, and I guess I'd like to explore that a little more, Ben. Because in my mind, I think there's some opportunity for some creative defining of what a trail and park amenity might look like. Because I think I recall places where we did trails and some significant park-like improvements along those trails that I just would be more comfortable if we were certain we had exhausted that as an option. Okay. And maybe council staff making that request of parks as well could be, could let them know how serious we are about it. But I do think that's an opportunity that I'd hate to lose out, especially in the context of a good master plan that has that trail connection well identified.
So let me ask you this. What do you think it will take to get us a number that's the total? How long and when can we?
So I'll go back to your comment earlier about making the number fit. So since March, when we had the meeting and it was contingently approved, the number that was approved, the 6.1-ish, am I getting that right, is we're very confident we can make the project, the undergrounding and the streetscapes fit within that number. If that's...
But the budget requests an additional
So what's the additional?
Yeah,
so there's a 500,000 and then a CIP request as well.
Yeah, right. So let me talk about the 18 request. So really the basis for that is as a placeholder number. It's a very non-competitive for us environment right now with the bidding environment. And so the thought behind that is to hold that money, understanding that this is the last significant project that we want to accomplish in the project area before it sunsets, to hold that money. If we're not able to get the bids that we want, to be able to have a little bit of flexibility. Coordinating with engineering is they're getting one bid, possibly two bids on some of the projects they're doing right now, which isn't competitive for us. The hope is that as we bid out in the winter, that we're in a little bit better bidding environment for us, but until we get that final bid number, we're not going to know for sure. And that's the same for us as well as on the city side.
So the 6.1 has no contingency, and you're asking for contingency?
No, it has contingency.
Of what percentage?
Right now we have 20% contingency built into the budget. And that's pretty standard. Working with engineering, that's what they recommended. So
Madam Chair.
Yeah.
If I could clarify one thing, I think what Ben's saying is if the 517 is not used towards this project will still happen based on the amount that the board has already approved for it. And the concept of the 517 is oftentimes on projects, there'll be some cost engineering that occurs when you do bidding, and that may be that instead of pavers in one place, you work on those items. And what that 517 could be used for is if there's maybe some of those gold-plated items, for board member Rogers' comment, that you could insert those in and maintain those elements. But ultimately, the 517 is not by any means contingent upon making the project happen. The project can happen based on the 6.1 million that has been appropriated by the board with contingencies.
So let me ask this, if we did appropriate that 500,000, whatever, and then you couldn't, the bid was too high or whatever, would that be money that would fall back into the fund, or is it then there?
No, it stays in the project until the project is closed. And oftentimes, I'll just say from experience in the general fund, what happens is as the project manager is, tracking the project and sees that all the funds aren't spent, things are added. And so the money always gets used. It's rarely, the general fund situation, there are cases where, $1,000 or $2,000 are left in CIP accounts and then closed out and reappropriated in later years.
But not generally funds to that level.
Right.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
I would suggest that I appreciate that there's some really serious competitive or non-competitive bidding going on out there, but I would suggest with the assurances of the staff that the 6.2 gets them going. I would rather not allocate the 518 at this point and have them come back to us based on how that bidding process goes, because I think there's sufficient time for that as well. And then we can identify a more specific number that may be realistic based on the bids we get in. And I appreciate that it's pretty bad out there from what I'm hearing from people getting bids back right now. Bad in that it's really good that there's a lot of economic development going on, Director Fritz. So that's made it bad. So if that's something that's acceptable,
Madam Chair, I still believe that we have not been able to make a proper decision because we haven't had all the information. I still think we need to have the other option on the table that we can look at and actually identify if that's the route that we want to go with moving the power lines instead of burying them.
And I guess the question I have is, has that ship sailed? Because we made that decision in March that we no longer could go back and look at the
I think it's just us doing a
alternative.
straw poll and asking them to bring us back information so that we can actually make that decision.
Is there a legal
Don't we have
commitment?
to undo a vote, you have to have a supermajority? Is that right, Cindy?
Actually, if what you're doing is reconsidering a vote, then it needs to be done at the next council meeting by someone who voted on the prevailing side, just a majority. Because there is, because you are in a budget process, anyone could make a motion to change the budget, and the decision wouldn't be made with that motion or with the previous motion even. It would be made as part of the vote on the final budget adoption night.
So you would be, just to add to that, I think the mechanics is you would be reallocating the budget that was previously allocated to undergrounding.
And I'm getting a positive nod from our finance director that is correct.
And at any time, anyone can ask for more information. If it's a big ask that would take a lot of work, then there's a straw poll taken. And if 4 people would like to have the information, then typically the information is provided or sought.
So board members, I'm looking for direction from you
Can
where
I-
you want to go with this.
James, I understand what you're asking for, and I am actually only interested in us reconsidering the first contingency that we placed, which is exploring funding costs for a western extension of utility undergrounding beyond the current scope. But we're kind of balking at the cost of the current undergrounding, and I don't see that we would actually consider I think the delaying this based on that is an unlikely path that we would take to expand the scope of this project.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
I think part of my recollection of that discussion was that an expansion might lead to an opportunity to explore bonding opportunities. I know there's some nuances about the city needing to own the property, but the RDA has a lot more flexibility around bonding for projects. But I don't have the sense that conversation is in a timeline that accommodates moving forward anywhere near the timeline we're talking about for getting this project started.
Well, and I think because the board voted to approve funds for the undergrounding last during the last budget amendment conversation, I think it was 2 meetings ago, that financing conversation is now separated from the undergrounding.
So I'd be willing to remove that extended exploration of undergrounding that we put on the condition
Number
of
6.
this. We put it on. We put it on as a condition,
10.
I think, of
Right.
this moving forward. It was there were several conditions related to public utility or public services, police department, fire department. And I think that was one of those as well, exploring some other options, including extending that undergrounding. But
The language for that contingency is at the bottom of page 9.
Yeah.
there you go.
Yeah.
So I think, you know, as we were just talking about with the Galvin roof repair needs, that, I mean, it's government, and so nothing moves very quickly. And on the other hand, I think you're seeing us at a limit of willingness of funding. And the last thing I would want to have happen here is for this project to die under its own weight, that it doesn't move ahead fast enough to be able to work within the 6.1, assuming we allow that to continue, and that you end up, you know, a year and a half down the road and 25% over budget on your minimum offer, your bid here, and it can't go anywhere. So what do you see as the biggest time hurdles for us with what we have already appropriated? And I open this up to our council staff and Cindy also, as you look at from that 10,000-foot view and all of the experience throughout the city, capital investments in streetway improvements and things. I know that there's a lot of balls that have to move ahead at the same time.
Yeah. I guess to answer the question about the biggest time constraint would be if we go a different route, we'd have to scrap the existing design and start over. I think that would be the biggest.
No, I mean with what we've already appropriated today, 2 months ago, two
Yeah,
meetings
okay.
ago.
I think the requiring to expand the scope to study additional undergrounding will require more time, because we'll have to restart those discussions with Rocky Mountain Power. And also, every time we work with Rocky Mountain Power, they charge us. So there is an expense to investigate and get to the level of detail on those cost estimates to expand the scope of the undergrounding. I think that would be one thing that would take us some time to research if we wanted to grow essentially the project scope from what's been presented to the board to date. And then I think the other one was it would require some time to investigate at the option of moving the poles versus undergrounding it. And this again would require somewhat of a modified discussion with Rocky Mountain Power versus the path that RD staff has been going down of undergrounding the poles. And both are possible, but there is a cost element, a time element to both of those options. Because again, Rocky Mountain Power is also a large organization that requires some time for us to get response back on. So these are essentially expanding what was approved in and RD staff would be happy to provide that, but it would take more time than what's initially been scoped.
So Ed and Ben, I think I heard you say that you were anticipating potentially going out for bid like fall, winter. Is that what you're thinking?
Yeah.
Partly for timing and partly for maybe better options for bids. So I'm wondering if there is a little bit of time in there that we might be able to at least address some of those. I do have a question for staff related to, as I'm reading this, the exploration of an extension for underground beyond the current scope. It seems that was tied specifically to the allocation for undergrounding. And is that part of the budget conversation? So you feel like there's some flexibility in that at this point that we aren't necessarily tied to that?
You could, if you wanted to change that, you could signal your intent through a straw poll. You wouldn't be changing it right now, but what you'd be saying is that in the budget adoption on the second week of June.
Okay. So I would be okay with that, Madam Chair, moving forward. I would be okay with moving forward with the almost 6.2 that's currently allocated, but not with the 518.
And Madam Chair, I'm still looking for a straw poll.
Would you like to propose one?
I propose that before we allocate any of these funds, that we request the administration go back to Rocky Mountain Power to find out a cost estimate to move the power poles instead of undergrounding.
Even though it will cost money to have them figure that out.
Yep.
And,
Okay.
and it would change the streetscape design, which is another cost and time.
We might want to
Yeah.
clarify
Okay.
on the Rocky Mountain Power evaluation. It's my understanding that, yes, there's a charge for Rocky Mountain Power to make the plan or evaluate, whatever it is you want to call it, but that is subtracted, if you make the decision to move forward, that is subtracted from what you would owe for the undergrounding. So if you were to go with the undergrounding, you wouldn't have a separate charge, just as a, by way of information.
And so another question is, if we did that exploration, are there opportunities to, I know that one of the challenges is that the power on some of these properties is fed from the street. Is there an opportunity to reroute that to the back of the property at all? Have we explored those options?
Those options have not been explored according to Utah, according to the power company.
So I think that, I mean, that it certainly seems like a question to be asked about routing that power to the back of the property rather than the front of the property. And if that's something, certainly there will still be a cost to that, but it would, I would suppose that would be less than undergrounding.
Yeah,
And that would protect the opportunities for the current plan on the streetscape.
I think if I could add to that, I mean, I think to the big cost, I think there would be probably a bigger cost to put them on the back of the property because we'd have to acquire all of that right away. Whereas right now the right of way is there. I think that's where that would go pretty quickly, is that we'd see that the cost would be even more because
More
of
than
right of way
undergrounding?
acquisition. What's that?
More than undergrounding to get the
Yeah,
right of way?
because of you'd
the
have
purchase.
to require easements from all those property owners
Mhm.
to put the poles, to move them there and keep them above ground versus where we have the right of way now. So
We
But
also have
if-
the Jefferson Walkway building that is up, and the height of that building, and a number of single-family homes on the backside of those buildings. That's no easy place
Right.
to get through.
Yeah.
Many property owners.
many, yep,
This is not a cheaper route.
I don't think so.
Well, we're not professionals in that field, Aaron. And that's the whole purpose of doing this, is so that we have every option that we can have on the table so we can make an informative decision. Because right now we're not. We completely bypass the alternative to find out that information. And we did that because of a straw poll. So all I'm asking is that we get the information. It's not going to cost us anything else. Coming from Cindy, you know, she says that it can be implied straight into what if the undergrounding is the way that we go. But without all that information, what are we doing? That's not true data. We're just saying, yeah, that sounds good. Let's underground it.
I'm sorry. I think that's oversimplifying what this process has already been through, what court has led this community through, the design process, that every department, that fire's been engaged in this design process, streets and engineering's been engaged in this process. This wasn't just pluck the gold toilet off the shelf and say, yep, that's what we want. That there is a city process, there is an RDA process that's gone on, and many, many months, if not years, of input has gone into this. So I think
get
it's
where you're coming from, Aaron.
oversimplifying it.
No, it's not. To me, it's not. Because you just mentioned everything that we've done. We haven't done the most simplistic thing, which is to find out that information.
James, do you want to then state the straw poll, and we'll take that?
I'll state the straw poll again, that I think that we need to go back to Rocky Mountain Power and get a cost estimate of what it would cost us to move the power poles closer to the street instead of undergrounding.
Okay. Those in favor of asking to find out that information about what it would cost to do it otherwise, thumbs up. Those opposed? And it looks like that is 4-2. So we need to get that information.
So
And
as
then-
a addition to that,
Okay.
As addition to that, I think options that may accommodate with minor modifications the streetscape would be helpful to consider.
And I need to indicate how the votes went, so we have that for the record. So one more time. In favor, Stan Penfold, Lisa Adams, James Rogers, Charlie Luke. Opposed, Andrew Johnston and Aaron Mendenhall. Okay. And then I also want to straw poll.
Madam Chair, may I also
Yes, sure.
comment on that? I'm concerned about us putting another open-ended deadline on this because we're putting it back in the hands of Rocky Mountain Power and not knowing what their kind of priorities
Mine
are.
is.
I know we're looking at our timing being this fall, winter for the actual bid process, but that'll get eaten up pretty quickly in this. Are we willing to bind ourselves to a decision time here? Because I think that's as important as this right now. We can keep looking at other options, but when I'm looking at this in my head, I'm not an engineer, but you go underground or you go above ground, either there or somewhere else. Are you going to double up on another street? Give them all the power lines? I mean, there's not good options here. I don't like the cost, but we are in this pretty deep, and I need to make sure that we're clear that we have some deadlines for ourselves, some expectations.
What would you propose?
I'd like to know sort of what we're looking at when we need to go out to bid this winter, if that's what we're going to do. Backing that up to into the summer, what we need.
Yeah. So can I clarify going back a little bit as far as the cost to get that number? So there is an upfront cost. So we are required to sign a contract with Rocky Mountain Power, and that money, we currently don't have that allocated. So I would need to go back to them, say, to look at specifically moving the poles, what that would cost, and then I would need to come back and make sure that everyone is okay with that number, unless you tell me otherwise, that use this money or that money where I can use it. So that, because I will be required to sign a contract with them to get this additional information to cover their estimators and engineers. And to Cindy's point, if we go with that route and we ultimately do a project, that money is rolled into their construction budget. So, but it does require an upfront expenditure.
And I think I should also say that if you don't do the undergrounding, then you do have to pay the cost.
Right.
And
Right.
one other thing,
Understood
Ben,
that.
though, is that Rocky Mountain Power was saying that in the first place the funds had not been, the funds are set aside in the budget, but the contract, was it signed already, or?
With
The
Rocky
first
Mountain
one.
Power?
The first one wasn't signed.
No.
So there's
No.
already funding set aside for that first contract.
No.
The council funded 27,000 or something like that a long time ago for that first contract, but Rocky Mountain Power,
I think that might be a different project.
that might be a different,
Yeah.
okay,
Yeah,
sorry.
we did
Yeah.
one with some
Sorry.
cost estimating on 100 South in the Depot District, and that was the same thing. The board provided some, that might have been the contract since we have several. And the thing I'd also add is one of the initial estimates, it is an estimate, and similar to Rocky Mountain Power, those estimates went up from what you initially saw when we had those undergrounding, and then when it was determined to move forward, additional funds were set aside to actually design out what the undergrounding looked like. So not to confuse it, but these would also be in the same area where we would have an initial estimate and may go up from what Rocky Mountain Power would propose for moving the poles. So as long as we're aware that what we would provide from the study would not be the final number for ultimately similar doing to what we did with undergrounding, where two numbers were provided. One was an estimate and one's an actual closer to the construction.
Okay.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
Could I request that when we get that information, that it also be presented with the cost estimate for the change in scope, if necessary, for the street improvements, that we look at that as a whole? Because I'd hate to see a savings on the undergrounding and an increase on the street improvements, or you
So
know,
we end up spending
the
the
same
or more.
amount. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Chair,
Yes.
if you're if you're receptive, I would like to do a straw poll removing the condition on the undergrounding funding for exploring options extending beyond the scope of this current project.
You read my mind. So, board members in favor of removing that contingency that they need to explore extending the scope? All in favor? That is unanimous.
And Madam Chair, I'd also like to straw poll a few.
Hang on for a minute.
Sorry, that scope extension is to the west, and it's the underground.
Correct.
Thank you.
Correct. We just want to make sure we have that in the
And then,
record. And then what else?
I'd like to
Stan?
straw poll that we ask the staff to move forward with their 6.187 million proposal, and we'll visit any potential cost overruns in the bidding process at a later date.
Are we okay with that? Those in favor? Okay, that is unanimous. Thank you so much. Thanks for moving us along. Does that, Jennifer, are we?
Yeah, Cindy.
Just-
Cindy?
I want to ask the RDA staff if we all have the same understanding of what that means.
Basically means not allocating the 518 at this point.
Okay, but moving ahead with that would mean moving ahead with the,
Well, with
With the same
assuming the condition of the additional information.
Okay, that's what I didn't know. Okay.
But I don't want the project to stop while we're waiting for additional information. And I mean, if we move forward, assuming at this point that we could potentially spend 6.187 million, depending on the results of the power
Of the information
conversation,
we have.
yeah.
And I wanted to confirm that as well, so thank you for bringing that up. Also, I think it's important for us to indicate to you that we would like you to come back to us with letting us know how much it's going to cost to have Rocky Mountain Power do that, and then we can allocate funding for that.
Thank you.
Okay, do you have any other questions for us?
Clarified our question.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. And I'm going to look to our council chair to see if you would be agreeable to either, do you want us to press on and eat up more work session time, or would you like us to try to do a 1-hour session next week? We've covered, what, 3 areas?
I say keep going. How much time do you, I know it's impossible to estimate how much time
this was the biggest one.
Okay. Yeah, no, I say go ahead and move on.
Okay,
And we'll try to do
Okay.
it fast.
all right.
So then the next item is the Depot District, the next page. If you go down to the 500 West preliminary design, just the board had some discussion on it and some questions and answers, and just giving an indication with a straw poll whether or not you want to move forward now or wait.
Do you want to?
This is, more information on this is on what, page 11 of the staff report that was previous.
Right.
Sorry, Jennifer, did you say 500 South? Because
Sorry, 500 West. I might have misspoke. Sorry about that.
So this is something, let's just highlight that it went down. The request went
Yes.
from 96 to
Yes.
86, 95 to 86, anyway. So it went down. And any conversation about this design study? Yeah.
I wanted to just link this with the conversation that we had with the administration during, gosh, what section of our budget? Maybe last week when we were talking about the,
Or was it
Yeah.
public services?
or maybe it was even with PD. It's all kind of blurring together at this point, but that there is a much broader, holistic approach that I would like to see. I think that many of us would probably like to see in addressing this area, and that this is a little component, but that we haven't really heard a full presentation yet of what's needed in that area. So it just feels like a fraction.
And Madam Chair,
Yes.
I'd like to echo Board Member Mendenhall's comments that there should be some pretty dramatic changes in this neighborhood in 2 years because of relocation of some of those shelter services, and we could easily fall into a trap of throwing a lot of short-term money at this without a larger plan for what that looks like and how to accommodate that area. And I just want to express some caution that we not piecemeal our money away in short-term stuff, and that we really have a bigger picture horizon on this.
Would you like to propose a straw poll on that?
I'm not quite sure what that means at this point, but I'm thinking that's something that maybe if the staff can indicate that they're willing to explore, I think that would probably come back to us in future things. I'm just really nervous about slowly spending a lot of money in this area for short-term solutions when the reality is it's going to be a very different area potentially in 2 years.
Madam Chair, sorry, weren't we supposed to have a major briefing on this? The agreement last week was we'd have it
Today,
this week during the city council meeting.
the homeless.
That was my understanding. The homeless discussion was supposed to have a complete plan this week, and I don't see it on the agenda. So I agree with Stan's point that I would hate to touch this until we have that. And I don't see that on this week's agenda. Am I wrong?
I think
Madam
last
Chair.
week's agenda is where the homeless discussion was going to be, and then it was rolled into the discussion with CAN and the PD.
Am I wrong? I thought they said we're going to have a very specific discussion of this.
Jennifer and I are both drawing a blank, which just
Okay.
means that it's budget season. It doesn't, it doesn't mean that you might not be. You are probably absolutely correct. Can you say a few more words to us so we know what it is?
Yeah, Director Reberg specifically was alluding to the broader homeless services discussion that we would be having this week.
And he deferred questions last week saying, well, we're going to have it this week, and I don't see it.
Yeah.
And that's where my concern with Stan's saying is that
Me too.
this is hard to even touch this, but
Now I remember where we
Okay.
ended up. Again, budget season,
Yeah.
my apologies. All the weeks blend together, so you're not the only one.
Understand.
It's in the unresolved issues staff report. So
Okay,
there
but-
is an item that talks about homeless, all of the different elements relating to homeless services and the funding levels in the unresolved issues staff report. So it doesn't appear separately on the agenda, but it's within that.
Madam Chair, I agree with my fellow board members who spoke up on this issue. It's not that I don't want to spend that money through the RDA. I think it's, if we had administration here today from the mayor's office, that
We do.
we would be asking them, I don't see anyone,
Yeah, sorry.
to,
Patrick was there a minute ago.
to coordinate with the RDA to ensure that the RDA who would be overseeing this particular design study is included in the discussions of planning for this greater.
And it sounds to me,
programming and
what I'm
investment.
hearing is that we don't want to expend this money right away. We want to hold off on it.
We can make a contingency anytime.
Right, and
They don't
I
have to be
actually
here.
think maybe an opportunity, since really, actually, I think the approach of the administration seems to be consolidating funding of homelessness for exactly that reason, that it be more coordinated.
Yeah.
Maybe we could, in between this week and next week, ask the administration how they could best see coordinating this money. Just off the top of my head, the scope calls for sort of like a guiding committee, like a principals guiding committee, and maybe it would make sense for the homeless coordinator in CAN to be a kind of key part
Yes.
of that committee, and maybe they would see the benefit of that. So we can work on that with the administration between this week and next
I think
week,
this
and-
is in line with the administration's
Right.
direction, so I just
Right.
want to make sure that we tie
and
it
we can make
together.
that a contingent appropriation based on that.
Thank you.
Great.
Sorry.
Okay. Then,
Then the next item is the public market implementation plan. And the administration did forward the latest feasibility study to our staff last week. We just haven't had a chance to digest and incorporate it into the report yet. So just wanted to make sure you knew that we do have it.
So, Jennifer, I do have a
And I think
question
we forwarded
about
it to the
this.
board,
The language is instead of, is this now a $150,000 project, or is this a an additional $50,000.
Sorry, it's instead of the 50, so the total is 100,000
So,
instead of,
okay, great.
instead of the 50 that was previously requested.
And board members, I would like to, I think that we probably need to have a policy and priority discussion about public market and see if this is still a priority for us, that we want to go down that road. We have received the feasibility study, but just barely, and see if this is something that is still a priority for the council, because it's been on the horizon for a long time. Some of us who were in Boston, we went to the public market there, and we heard how expensive it was and that it doesn't fund itself very well. But nevertheless, I think it's important for us to have that conversation, and I think we'd like to invite economic development and RDA to maybe weigh in their thoughts as well. Any comments on that?
Madam Chair, just a quick question. So the $100,000 that we see proposed in this budget for the implementation plan, is that tied specifically to a specific location? Is that the plan for the area that's been proposed, or is it open to other areas as well?
I think it's to a specific area, but
Right, that's what we
my
understand as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
Could we expand the area and add potential areas to look at if we fund this implementation plan? If we decide that there may be another area that would be better.
Yes, I think it would be a discussion with Urban Food Connections and the Downtown Alliance. But the feasibility study was specific to Site 5 and Station Center, which is at 5th West and 3rd South. There were some discussions about the Rio Grande also, but the implementation plan, we'd probably want to first address the feasibility study and understand how that changes it, if there's other locations, and then address the implementation plan, which really a lot of it's in what is the process of creating a public market, do a request for proposal for developers, market it, other things. So I think we could look at that flexibility with the scope and work with the board and the Downtown Alliance staff on that, if that was of interest.
Okay.
Cindy?
I think one of the main issues that we've been noticing is that each board member may have a different degree of information, and so that was why the chair was suggesting that all be brought back so that you all hear it at the same time, and so we could add in the question that you are asking as well.
So, Madam Chair, for me, I think it would make a lot of sense to have a good briefing on the feasibility study. And a lot of these questions and concerns about, arrangements and location and types and other models, they'll all come out of the feasibility study. And so at that point, then it makes some sense for us to give some indication of our comfort level going in this direction or that direction. And that could be site selection, it could be financing models, it could be a number of things. But I think I'd feel a little more comfortable doing that feasibility download first. I think there's a lot of information that we gathered, several of us on the trip gathered around some really great things and some potential red flags that came up. And I think it's more about being really thoroughly prepared for what we're committing to long term, and I think all of us want to see a public market that's very successful from a participation perspective and from a financial perspective. So, if that's something that works in the timeline, I would suggest that would be a good direction.
I'm looking to our staff and to Ed, what would be a reasonable time for us to be able to have a thorough briefing on the feasibility study? And I mean, we received it.
Yeah, we received it. Maybe the
and
the July meeting would be
the July meeting
appropriate?
would.
It just depends. Maybe what we could do is come back to you. We have several things that we've said. Maybe July, one of them is the financing conversation. So that is a big one.
Right.
Project area creation is another
Yeah,
big item.
that we have there.
But definitely, I think the intent initially, Madam Chair, was that we would have the feasibility study presentation with the board, but because of the budget cycle, it just caught up, or we were asking for that. So I think the intent was to always, as Board Member Penfold mentioned.
One question, Ed, with the feasibility study, it is my understanding that it is focused exactly on that spot. It isn't a feasibility, it's not general in terms of, it's fairly specific from
It is,
what
but there's
I
some general
saw.
items.
Okay.
They did a demand analysis, a supply analysis.
Right, those, I looked
and
at
other
those things.
Yeah, that are,
That it will, no matter where it would go, it would work. 'Cause I know there's some interest in multiple locations, one of which is not in an RDA area, I don't think. And so that could take it off your plate completely.
yeah.
And I see a smile there. So are we okay with holding off on this for right now? Okay. Then any other comments?
And
Yeah.
I guess I'm okay, assuming that we're talking about July at the latest sort of download on. Yeah, I hope we can schedule some healthy time around it, because I hope that we invite the Downtown Alliance and the RDA staff to maybe co-present or something like that, because I really do. I can't remember the last time we had a really healthy discussion about the market and the opportunities, and even the current market and what's happening there. So I know they're kind of
was prior to
busting at the
2014.
seams. So yeah.
Hey,
so, thanks.
Derek and I have talked about wanting to have that, so we will get that scheduled. Okay.
So then the next item, if you go to the Greenery District,
Let me back you up. Did you want to say anything about capital expenditures in
my apologies.
Depot
Skip.
District?
Sorry about that. So those capital expenditures are proposed to go towards station center infrastructure. So that would be added to any amount that the board decided to allocate from the fiscal year 17 funds, or would be folded into a discussion on financing. So.
Okay, very good. Questions about Depot District? Okay.
And Greenery. The next yellow shaded item is the adaptive reuse program, and there was some discussion about the program and some questions and answers the last time it was discussed. Just didn't know if the board wanted to straw poll it or adjust the amount. There were two other projects that were raised subsequent to the budget being submitted in this project area, and so unless other project area funds like program income fund or housing funds were used for those projects, you would need to find somewhere else to fund them, and adaptive reuse is essentially that, and the miscellaneous property expenses are the only really discretionary funds, I guess you could say.
Ed, sorry, may I invite you to come back for a minute? With the VOA infrastructure reimbursement of $135,000, and thanks, Court. Do you have any suggestion of where those funding dollars come from?
We do. There's about $1.1 million of unappropriated funds in the Greenery District that was initially meant for the 400 West funds as part of Budget Amendment 3. Those dollars were not adopted because it was determined that time to let those drop to the bottom. And
are those program income funds, or
they are
what
actually
are they?
tax increment in the
Tax
Greenery
increment.
District.
Okay. So that's what you're looking to. Okay, I was interested to know that. All right. Questions or comments on this portion?
Yeah, Madam Chair. Timing and process has been a little bit of concern for me on this one, and I know this sort of maybe fell through the cracks, but it harkens back to a conversation I think I had back when I was chair at RDA about potentially relooking at our strategy for rebuilding streets in the Greenery neighborhood in particular, and recognizing at some point that we weren't going to raise enough money in the lifetime of the project to rebuild 400 West, and maybe thinking of reconfiguring a program where we provided support to property owners or developers who did projects there, and we reimbursed them for the cost of their street improvements. Unfortunately, we never got around to actually making that a program in the area. And so, although this is a little unusual, it's a little bit of the back door. I appreciate the concept, and I think it's a strategy that we might want to explore, in particular in newer RDA areas. So I'm hoping that we can see some program development around this as an eligibility component for a RDA district that says if you do street improvements on a priority street that we have for reconstruction, we can look at a reimbursement. That way we could put some parameters around it, some guidelines, so people know going into a project that that's what they're looking at. But I'm supportive of the VOA. I'm supportive of the construction they did there. I know that there were sort of pieces of this conversation that I was familiar with, but we really should put some more structure around it if that's the direction we're going to go.
Other comments, Aaron?
I think that sounds like a compliment to the council's desire around street improvements and the streets infrastructure improvements. So I like that idea of making this a more standard procedure and process for us.
You were indicating you were looking for a straw poll specifically on what, give me some direction there. What?
Just whether or not to include it in the budget, and then if you wanted to include it in the budget, what the funding source would be.
Include the VOA project?
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah, and it sounds like the funding source is from
Program income fund.
tax increment.
Or
Those would have to be added to the budget. Those have not technically fallen to fund balance yet because the fiscal year isn't over. That's part of the confusion of what does unappropriated funds mean. They were never actually appropriated towards Fourth West, so they're just project area funds. They're not Fourth West funds. So just to
Can
be
I
clear.
ask then to have you help us come up with the appropriate way to access
we'll
those
work
funds?
on that
and
with
will we do that?
finance
Okay.
if the board is supportive of that concept.
Then let's straw poll that. Those in favor of looking for a way to fund the reimbursement to VOA, all in favor? That is unanimous. Thank you very much. And there's also a note about Board Member Kitchen's mural project that he would like to see some funding there. Do you know how he was proposing to fund that?
We don't.
Okay, then we
Sorry.
save that for conversation when he's here with us. Okay, all right.
And so, sorry, then back on the adaptive reuse program.
yes,
because
excuse me,
the
I'm
funds
sorry.
were identified from somewhere else. I don't know if you want to straw poll support of that as proposed, or if you want to put contingencies on it or change the amount.
Board members, how do you feel about scooping up those funds? Do you want to have some contingencies about how those monies are used? Would our finance team have any suggestions on that?
No, there was a discussion back and forth
Right.
about how the program can be scaled up or down and how success is measured, that kind of thing, the last time you guys discussed it. So,
Right.
or if you're just supportive and would like to hear
so-
more, maybe mid-year, a report on how it's going.
Yeah, that is actually, I was going to
I
propose that.
guess
James, go
my
ahead.
question is, what would the 75,000 get you for the adaptive reuse program?
So it's actually 297,360.
Whoa, what would that 297 be able to do?
So, may I answer that?
Yeah.
I think that could get us one, conceivably two projects in that neighborhood. And the examples I would share is we've used this program twice. One would be for Atmosphere Studios. It's located 700 West, and okay, you're familiar with that. And then the other would be Fisher Brewery. So each of those were kind of $75,000-ish loans, yeah. And so we could do a couple more of those.
I think both times we've done those, we've said, do more. We love this. So keep on.
I would, board members, I would like to say, come back to us and give us an update on what your plans are and what direction it's going. Is everyone comfortable with that?
Yeah, could I ask
Yes.
for a bit more that, if it's possible to give us some feedback about the opportunities you see to expand the use of this? I think it's a creative funding option for local business. And anyway, I want to see us grow this if there is a market for it.
Yeah, and I would answer that, anecdotally, I can think of 2 opportunities that folks that are sort of looking into the program right now within the Granary District that would be sized comparably in terms of the loan amount. And we continue to see a lot of interest. I mean, I probably field a call or 2 a week on this program from property owners who want more information about it.
Great.
Charlie?
So, yeah, thanks, Aaron, for bringing that up, because I think that, this is one of the programs that we have a really good track record with, just with the 2 projects that have been funded. Depending on what you come back with, I mean, this is something that I would like to actually, put more money into, because I do think that it is effective at getting new businesses up and running in a quick way that have big impact on areas. So I'm very interested in hearing what y'all come back with, because I do think that this is an area that I would like to actually see more funding directed to.
Madam Chair, so does any part of our current program include forgiving the loan over time?
Yeah, in fact, that's how
It's
it's
5
structured.
years.
It's a forgivable loan once the improvements are completed.
And so it's once it's completed?
Correct.
Okay,
Once it's
great.
completed. Yeah.
Thanks.
Okay.
And on to North Temple.
Cool.
The 2 transfers to CIP are the 10% school construction fund and capital expenditures. We didn't highlight that blue on the school construction fund. I think in that case, because it's a legal requirement of the taxing entity agreements, that's probably one that you guys would be comfortable adopting since it's required. But the CIP project is $135,000 for the North Temple catalytic development.
Any questions on that? North Temple? Right.
So we'll skip down. Block 70, all of these are essentially legal requirements. I think in future years, we will look closely at that reserve for Eccles Theater debt service, and I think we discussed that a little bit last time, so we don't need to go into it again. But for this year, it still makes sense to keep funding that so that you build up your reserve to help you with the lean years. North Temple Viaduct, that's a pass-through to help the general fund pay debt service on the North Temple Viaduct Bridge. That percentage of the debt service that's covered by the RDA has been increasing over the years, so that's always good. Means the general fund's portion of that has gone down. Still not quite half, but.
Jennifer, my recollection is that extends north, so hopefully when those projects to the north come online, that's going to help
even more.
significantly, I think. So.
Right.
Okay.
Any questions on
Sorry.
these? Excuse me, I didn't mean to interrupt you. Okay, go ahead.
The next is the revolving loan fund. We have a few outstanding questions about sort of the logistics of the reimbursement for the homeless resource center sites, but I don't think anything that would affect how you adopt the budget. So unless you are interested in any other contingencies, I think that would just be adopted as is.
Very good.
And then the program income fund, the only reason we've starred the project area creation and the professional services is something you guys might want to discuss is there were a couple of questions last time for the project area creation, more about how those funds would be directed between the State Street project area and the 9-Line project area, and sort of how needs would be prioritized, because that's a pretty small amount for both project areas. And then on the professional services, just a reporting of actual consultant services used. So we would prepare some sort of contingency along those lines for those funds if that's what the board was interested in.
I would be interested in seeing where we're allocating those professional services. Are they project area specific? Are they generic across all RDA? I think that would be really valuable information. It helps us track a little better what we're investing in a neighborhood. And I do have a question maybe for Ed on the project area creation dollars. I know we've got some in our current budget, and you've done a lot of work on that. Is that, I mean, you're comfortable with that request for moving forward?
Yes, we are. And one thing to help clarify this is the funds were meant to, we've kind of funded Northwest Quadrant from a different source as we funded that economic development visions for that. So the intent of this scope is not to go towards that. It's to help set up with any preliminary studies or other things as we look at the 9 Line and State Street. But we also know that throughout the year, the board members may have questions about other potential areas in the city. So it's been past practice kind of set aside some money in project area creation. This could be an annual appropriation that drops down to the bottom. But if the board desired to have any additional investigation of areas, whether they're one block areas or other things, then we also have these funds available for that. But the primary intent is to be really help facilitate any of those expenses with creating a new project area.
Thank you.
And the capital expenditures line item for program income fund is proposed to be going towards station center infrastructure, and that would be well informed by a bond financing discussion later in the year. So that's why we've marked it with the blue.
Very good.
Down to citywide housing. The only reason we marked this, and it wasn't necessarily to say that the depot district would need to be singled out, but to flag the concern and discuss if the board wanted to make a contingent appropriation or maybe a legislative intent asking the administration to look into how to better track how specific project areas benefit from the dollars that are allocated to citywide housing. So, right, there was the conversation last time about the policy goals of citywide housing compared to the policy goals of housing in project areas, the needs of both of those, and that one could actually support the other. It's just that we don't do a lot of specific tracking or data on how one supports the other. And so to just be more intentional about that, since this is a little bit of a shift in how we've done it in the past.
Any questions on that? I think that's a good approach.
Okay.
Okay.
And that's the end of it.
All right.
So we'll prepare those legislative intents, and we'll prepare a motion sheet based on this kind of discussion, unless we hear questions otherwise. We'll leave the mural project out for a future discussion.
Okay.
And I don't know when if we want to have that on the 6th or on the night of the adoption of the 13th. So
Okay.
we will
Director
talk about that with the chair.
Director Fritz, do you have anything you want to add? Or okay. All right. Okay. Yes, Aaron?
Can I bring something up it's not in the context of the key changes, but for the funding that we already reviewed for RDA around travel and expenses with staff, that I've requested in RDA meetings twice in the last year that the RDA staff look at opportunities for the board to travel with staff to look at other cities who have redeveloped State Street-like areas. And I have not heard back anything.
Because we're completely unique.
I don't think so. There's a State Street in every capital city, and there's probably more than one.
Austin,
North
Texas has a
Temple, too.
really cool rehab project on there. What would be
Congress?
equivalent to, Congress Street, yeah.
And I've been on an RDA trip in the past, but it's been several years. And I know that's something that historically we do occasionally. So I asked maybe as chair,
Okay.
if you could look into this more, and I would like feedback on this. I haven't heard anything.
And I'll look to all of you to see if there's something out there that would be useful for us to see, that would be beneficial for State Street. Okay. I need to circle back. When I had us approve the minutes, I stated for March 28th, 2017, and skipped right over the part about approving the May 2nd and the May 16th meetings. So I'm looking for...
I move we approve.
Okay. Motion to approve the minutes by Board Member Penfold, the second by Board Member Luke. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, we are, those are approved unanimously, and we are adjourned as RDA. Mr. Chair,
No break. No, I'm sorry. We're going. No, I'm kidding.
10 minutes?
Let's come back at quarter after, and quarter after, please. Don't be disappearing. Quarter after. Quarter after.